Hello friend. I want to tell you about the Opel Astra J car. The fourth generation of the popular Opel Astra debuted in 2009, at the same time that the Insignia also appeared on the market. Both models, designed under the leadership of the GM concern, had a lot in common with American motoring, because they were created as solid, heavy, reliable cars for many years. The silhouette of the Astra was a huge step forward. It looked more modern than its biggest market competitor, the Volkswagen Golf V. The fact that the successor looks almost the same is proof of how successful this car was. What is also worth noting is that the 2012 facelift hardly changed the car at all. The differences are only a subtle enlargement of the lower and a reduction of the upper grille. You will find greater differences than after the facelift in cars that differ in equipment specifications or packages. The facelift primarily affected engines and equipment. The next significant technical change came in 2014. More serious intervention was made in the engine range to adapt diesels to the Euro 6 standard. This year, production of the 5-door hatchback was also ended, because it would have been internal competition for the new Astra K. The sedan was in production the longest, and there was no equivalent in the Astra K. Opel Astra J. What kind of car is it? The first thing that comes to mind is heavy. The Astra J weighs significantly more than its competitors, and you don't have to be an experienced driver to feel it. Is this a disadvantage? On the one hand, it doesn't have a positive effect on dynamics and fuel consumption, but on the other, the car rewards you with driving stability and high driving comfort. If we take into account only those driving characteristics that are useful for everyday use, then the Astra J is, in my opinion, number one among compacts of this period. It may not be good for track driving. Even the sports version of the OPC is not outstanding here. But when you require the car to behave safely, the Astra J will not disappoint. The car's suspension is quite an unusual design in general. In the front there is a classic McPherson strut, although supported by aluminum wishbones, but in the rear there is a torsion beam with a Watts rod. It has shock absorbers and springs mounted separately, and is additionally connected to the body by reaction rods, which eliminate the unfavorable phenomena resulting from such a design. Optionally, in more powerful engine variants, shock absorbers with variable damping force flex ride were installed. The second association with the Astra J is cramped. Neither the front nor the back spoils with the amount of space. If we compare the Astra with the Golf V, it is not so bad, but the Golf V is a completely different class. It is worth knowing that some more expensive models were equipped with ultra-comfortable seats with the AGR mark. They have a very large range of adjustments, including extendable seats, and are strongly profiled, which will not be to everyone's taste. Interestingly enough, the Opel Astra J was available in two wheelbases, 2,685mm and 2,695mm, but the longer one was not reserved for the station wagon or sedan, but for the 3-door GTC hatchback. In terms of space in the back, the Astra J is just right, but not for taller people. Of course, children will travel without a major problem if the adults in front are not too tall. Even the boot space is not too big. The station wagon offers 500 liters, the sedan 460 liters, the 5-door hatchback 370 liters, and the 3-door 380 liters. The interior has another advantage besides spaciousness. It is well made and very ergonomic, although it doesn't spoil the storage either. On the other hand, the operation is sensational. Everything is in buttons and knobs. At first, it's hard to get your head around it, but after a month of driving the Astra, it's hard to imagine that fewer buttons is a good thing. Overall, the car is pleasant, well soundproofed, comfortable, as it should be. Solid and heavy at the same time, but safe and secure. People who like such cars will not want to exchange the Astra J for anything else, because such cars are no longer made and will never be made. The Astra K, although visually similar, is a different car inside as well. Opel Astra. What engines were installed? This is a broad topic, because the engine range includes 20 drive units. But it can be simplified slightly, because some were simply available in several power variants. The petrol range starts with a naturally aspirated 1.4 with 87 HP sold only on selected markets until 2012. The standard was the 100 HP version. From 2013, i.e. after the facelift, this engine was abandoned and the basic unit was already 1.6 with 115 HP, which was on offer from the beginning to the end of the model's production. The optimum were two versions of 1.4, but with turbocharging with 120 or 140 HP. The 1.6 turbo engine was positioned higher, available in two versions. Until the facelift, a unit with multi-point injection with 180 HP was offered, and after the facelift with direct injection with 170 and 200 HP. At the top of the petrol range is a 2-liter engine with 280 HP, powering the top version of the Astra, the OPC. However, such a car was offered only from 2012. In the diesel range we have 5, and in practice 4 engines. From the beginning of production, diesels 1.3 CDTI, 1.7 CDTI and 2.0 CDTI were used. In pre-facelift cars, 1.3 engines are on the market about 4% and 2-liter about 23%. The rest, or over 70%, are pre-facelift diesel 1.7 CDTI and post-facelift 1.6 CDTI. The 2.0 CDTI engine was offered until 2015, and 1.3 and 1.7 until 2014. 3 types of gearboxes were combined with the engines. Manual 5-speed gearboxes were available only with the weakest, basic 1.4 and 1.6 petrol engines and occasionally in the 1.3 CDTI configuration. 6-speed gearboxes were available for the remaining petrol engines and all diesels. This is where a very important issue arises regarding the use and repairs of the Astra J. The 5-speed gearboxes marked as F17 are quite good, solid. The 6-speed ones marked as M32 are not. This is one of the biggest flaws of the Astra J, to which I will devote a separate thread. Automatics, 2 types, have a classic design with a converter and 6 gears. They are combined with a 1.6 petrol engine, a 1.4 turbo, 2 1.6 turbo engines, and a 2-liter diesel. They are durable and there are no major problems with them. Which engine to choose? In the case of the Astra J, the choice is important because the gearbox is also very important, as it significantly affects the vehicle's operation. It is not even wrong to say that the gearbox is more important in the case of the Astra J than the engine itself. But for now, let's focus only on engines. As for petrol-fueled cars, there are no major problems with them in terms of operation and each unit can be considered good. Of course, the 1.6 engine is the basis, because the 1.4 without a supercharger is simply too weak. The 1.6 engine gives decent, although not particularly good performance. It is also suitable for cooperation with an LPG installation. The same can be said about the better, more dynamic 1.4 turbo. Regardless of the power variant, it is simply the right engine for the Astra. The larger 1.6 turbo engine gives better dynamics, but is not as popular as the 1.4. Also in workshops and on the spare parts market, although there should be no fear or resistance to buying an Astra with such an engine if we find a nice example. Here, however, it is worth bearing in mind that only before the facelift the 1.6 engine is available within direct injection, enabling the installation of LPG. Direct injection is not a big obstacle, but it is not necessarily worth doing so. The best for LPG is the 1.4 turbo engine or the naturally aspirated variant with 100 HP. Now diesels. The 1.3 engine is a Fiat design, reliable, proven, with minor flaws, but solid. You can take it if you don't mind poor dynamics and vibrations. The 1.7 CDTI engine, which has its roots in the Japanese company Isuzu, will definitely be better. It is a solid, refined unit with good parameters. Even in the weakest 110 horsepower version, the car has not bad performance. The facelifted version with 125 or 130 HP that meets the Euro 5 standard is recommended. Unfortunately, driving the Astra with the 1.7 CDTI engine won't be as enjoyable as with the 1.6 CDTI. This engine is characterized by a fairly low work culture, weak bottom end and higher fuel consumption, but also worse dynamics compared to a newer engine with similar power. Since 2014, the 1.7 CDTI has given way to the new 1.6 CDTI unit. And that's where the problem lies, because although the engine shines with all its advantages when it's working, it breaks down all too often. After the M32 gearbox, it's the second biggest flaw of this car. The most sensitive element is the timing drive located on the flywheel side. The chain can stretch and cause problems with engine operation. In general, due to the highly advanced exhaust gas cleaning system, the engine causes smaller and bigger problems in this area. I do not recommend the Astra J with such an engine. It is better to choose a petrol variant from similar years. The 2-liter diesel is another Fiat design. It has a fairly simple injection system and there are no concerns about excessively high repair costs. Performance is of course excellent, minimum 350 Nm, and the bi-turbo version with 195 HP is a real rocket. The Golf GTD has only had any approach since its 7th generation. If you are looking for an Astra that is both dynamic and economical, the 2.0 CDTI is a good option, although of course burdened with the risk of expensive failures. To sum up the issue of engines, the optimal unit for the Astra J is the 1.4 turbo. The average fuel consumption reported by users is around 7.5 L, 100 kilometers, but in reality it is a bit higher, because the onboard computer cheats a lot. If this is too much, you can install an LPG installation, which this engine accepts without any problems. If you don't care about dynamics, then a good engine is the naturally aspirated 1.6. It also works on gas, and if you care mainly about dynamics and a petrol unit, it is good to look for the 1.6 turbo, regardless of the type of injection. On the other hand, people looking for peace of mind should choose the 1.4 variant with 100 HP. When looking for a diesel, you should focus on the 1.7 and 2.0 engines. The smaller one is a unit for more economical drivers, approximately 6L 100 kilometers, while the larger one is a proposition for those looking for dynamics and reasonable fuel consumption, approximately 6.5L 100 kilometers. The smaller 1.3 diesel is, in my opinion, a better option than the 1.6, although it is certainly not as pleasant to drive. Opel Astra with factory LPG installation. Opel sold the Astra J with a factory autogas installation from Landi Renzo fitted to the 140 horsepower version of the 1.4 turbo. It is worth knowing that the A14 net unit was specially adapted for this, including reinforced in the head and valve areas. What is more, it was one of the few cars with a fully factory installation, i.e. fitted on the production line, and not only after the car was manufactured. In connection with the above, all the components have been nicely fitted into the car. Switching to gas is done with a button that does not differ from the others, and on the instrument panel we have the gas level shown with the factory fuel level indicator. The only drawback is the gas filler located under the flap, but requiring the use of a reduction. The opinions about the Landi Renzo installation are very good, and the engines work great with it. Importantly, there is no problem with servicing these cars. However, it is worth considering whether to buy such a car, e.g. with a mileage of over 200,000 kilometers. The engine may not be in the best condition, although there is no rule here. However, it is definitely better than one not adapted to LPG with an installation that does not fully fit the Astra. Opel Astra J, gearbox issue. However, when choosing the engine version of the Astra J, the issue of the gearbox should be taken into account. The manual 6-speed M32 gearbox produced by General Motors is a source of considerable trouble and often costs from $1,000 to $1,500 to replace or repair. It is a failed design that should not be underestimated. It turns out that in practice it is the biggest source of problems in most cars. In Opel's after the facelift, the design of the gearbox, its lubrication system, was improved, which does not mean that everything is fine with it. It is better after the post, but it is still not good. Therefore, as I wrote above, the choice of the 1.4 or 1.6 engine with a 5-speed gearbox will give you peace of mind. An alternative may also be to choose a car with an automatic, which does not generate major problems. Another option is to choose the 2.0 CDTI version, which uses the F40 gearbox. It is not an exceptionally durable design, but it is much better than the M32. What if we buy a car with an M32 gearbox? First of all, we need to change the oil. The manufacturer does not recommend this, hence the problems. Importantly, it is recommended to pour more oil into the M32 than the manufacturer predicts for filling. Here is another reason for problems. It is best to go to a workshop specializing in servicing and repairing these specific transmissions, they do exist, where you can also verify the condition of the transmission. If it turns out that the bearings need to be replaced, do it without delay. Prolonging such a repair can result in the destruction of the housing and other elements and ultimately the need for replacement. Currently, it costs about $1,200 for a reconditioned transmission. Including replacement, you have to expect to spend about $1,500. If something happens to the clutch, the amount can increase to about $2,500. How to recognize wear in the M32 gearbox? Any disturbing sounds such as noise, howling, humming, may be early signs of bearing wear in the gearbox. Signs of larger problems are the movement of the gear lever when adding and releasing the gas. Theoretically, a test drive is enough, but in practice it is better to have an experienced person do the verification. It should also be emphasized here that authorized Opel services are not necessarily the best place for such verification, because GM in Europe has never officially admitted that there are any problems with the M32. Typical engine faults. In terms of faults, we'll start with engines, because although they're generally good, each has its weaknesses. In fact, the only one that doesn't have them is the naturally aspirated 1.4. You have to neglect it a lot for anything to come out of this engine. But the 1.4 turbo has problems with the boost system and the breather. This leads to excessive oil consumption and sometimes damage to the turbocharger, even cracking it, hot side housing. Any of these symptoms, such as jerking, loss of power, or stalling, should prompt a quick check of the damage, preferably by a mechanic who has already dealt with this unit. Usually, problems are located in the valve cover and its surroundings, not deeper in the engine. The cooling system pump is not very durable, which can result in leaks or a drop in efficiency. It is recommended to replace it every 80,000 kilometers. The durability of the timing chain could also be higher. It often makes noise at a mileage of 150 to 200,000 kilometers. While this all sounds worrying, serious failures of the 1.4 turbo engine are rare. It is one of the best engines in its class from this period and truly worth recommending. More good things can be said about the naturally aspirated 1.6, which, apart from occasional minor faults, is generally almost maintenance-free. Almost, but it makes a difference for people who intend to install an autogas system, because in this version of the 1.6, hydraulic tappets have been abandoned. The second issue is the timing. The drive should be replaced in its entirety, because after larger mileages, the variable phase wheels sometimes generate noise. The refined petrol unit is the 1.6 turbo, regardless of whether we are talking about a pre- or post-facelift engine. Contrary to appearances, these are two different designs. The older one has indirect injection and a timing belt, and the newer one has direct injection and a timing chain. There are very few similarities in construction, and the newer engine is considered more successful, as it copes better with large mileages. The common problem of both units is oil leaks. Both also occasionally have valve cover damage and a problem with the breather valve, which is characterized by the oil cap sucking and a whistle heard under the hood. The original cover can be purchased for about $250 minus $350 or rebuilt for about $50 $100. Now let's move on to diesel engines. There are potentially many more faults here, although with the exception of the 1.6 CDTI unit, it is generally good. Unfortunately, this engine struggles with many minor problems due to ecology, but there are also serious ones. For example, a stretched timing chain, which due to its delicate construction requires replacement quite often, and this is a costly operation. The biggest problem for the user is the modernity of this unit. It is about spare parts that are connected into subassemblies, without the possibility of replacing one of the elements. An example would be the exhaust manifold, which must be replaced together with the delicate, cracking pipe connected to it. The exhaust system is packed with sensors, and the intake system is very heavily contaminated with returning exhaust after 100,000 kilometers. The injectors are very sensitive to fuel quality, so it is worth filling up with premium fuel. The engine may use oil. It must be changed frequently, because the amount of fuel that accumulates in place of the oil sometimes exceeds the limits of imagination. The older generation 1.7 CDTI engine is much better. It has its problems, but repairs are not as complicated and expensive. The biggest problem is the oil leak from the oil pump driven by the timing belt. It is important not to ignore it, because the oil leaks directly onto the belt, which weakens it. Especially after buying a car, it is worth ordering a preventive replacement of the timing drive together with the pump. Ready-made sets for $70 do not include pumps. They must be purchased separately for about $175. Replacing the timing drive is necessary because the belt has a fairly short service life, about 90,000 kilometers, so there is no point in taking risks. Sometimes the unit struggles with failures of the turbocharger control system. The injectors are much more durable compared to the 1.6 CDTI, but not as cheap as in the larger 2.0 CDTI, because they come from Denso. Two extremely different units, namely the 1.3 CDTI and the 2.0 CDTI, are Fiat designs. The 2.0 CDTI is potentially the least problematic design, because not only is it very durable, but it also has good access to relatively cheap spare parts. However, to experience this, you have to know the dark side of this unit and ecology at the same time. The painful truth about this engine is that its biggest problem is the cleaning solutions. The DPF filter gets clogged up really badly, and clogging can even destroy the engine. That's why it's being cut out en masse, and it's after the filter is cut out that the engine gains in the eyes of users. The second weak point is the swirl flaps located in the manifold, which, working together with the turbocharger and EGR valve, create air swirls in the combustion chambers. Unfortunately, the intake system is heavily contaminated with carbon deposits created by the EGR system, which leads to the flaps getting blocked and even breaking off, quite common cases, which can of course result in the destruction of the engine. To get rid of this problem and risk, it is recommended to remove and plug the swirl flaps. After such an operation, it is also necessary to turn off the EGR valve and DPF filter. Of course, people who think in terms of ecology are scratching their heads, but don't worry, this is only one of two ways, better and cheaper from an operational point of view. Why am I writing about it? Because you have to be aware that many cars on the market no longer have either flaps or DPF. There is another way to deal with these problems, definitely more expensive and more environmentally friendly: regular cleaning. After about 40 to 60,000 kilometers, the collectors should be removed, washed, carbon deposits should be dissolved, the condition of the flaps should be checked, and possibly replaced. It is also recommended to clean the EGR valve and avoid driving short distances. The cleaning operation alone costs about $250, which should be added to the bill every third or fourth oil change. Of course, such procedures mean that the only reason for buying a 2.0 CDTI diesel is its very good performance, because it will certainly be difficult to find savings in this. In the top version, the 2.0 CDTI engine has 2 turbochargers in series and 2 intercoolers. Apart from the typical problems of this unit, in the case of this version, you should expect higher repair costs of the supercharging system. The good news is the use of Bosch injectors, which can be cheaply regenerated. It is worth shortening the timing belt replacement period to about 100,000 kilometers. The smallest engine in the range is the 1.3 CDTI. Here we are dealing with a Fiat design jointly designed with Opel. The injection was provided by Bosch, which is the first piece of good news. The second is the durable timing chain, which can stretch if the oil is neglected, and it is this that divided users into satisfied and dissatisfied. In theory, it can withstand a mileage of 300,000 kilometers without any major problems, provided that we keep an eye on the oil service and oil condition. The oil tensioner that tensions it needs the right pressure to work efficiently. If there is no oil or it is already heavily contaminated, the chain does not tighten and slowly stretches. Replacing the timing belt itself is not a problem, but the problem is when the chain stretches so much that it shifts on the sprockets. Interestingly, the engine manufacturer has made it possible to fully check the chain tension without removing the cover through a small window. An interesting design feature is the construction of the oil pump, which is integrated with the timing drive housing. Although it sounds expensive, in reality it costs about $75 minus $100, and if it becomes necessary to replace the timing drive, it is worth replacing the pump at the same time. Minor problems include a poor connection between the gas position sensor and the computer, which results in poor response to gas. Cleaning the contacts is enough. Loss of power is often caused by a faulty MAF sensor. Poor response to adding gas is also a symptom of incorrect control of the variable geometry turbocharger. On the other hand, jerking during acceleration may indicate a leak in the injection system or a blocked EGR valve. Typical car faults. The Astra J is a solid car that rarely breaks down. A huge advantage is its high corrosion resistance and stable electrics. If there is a failure in this area, it usually concerns such trifles as burnt-out bulbs on the dashboard or problems with pedal position sensors. Other equipment elements, such as the lock or electric windows, fail less often. Users complain about the low durability of batteries in cars equipped with the start and stop system. Due to the large mass of the car, the front shock absorbers have to be replaced quite often, especially in the heavier 1.7 and 2.0 diesels. More durable, but costing about $250 apiece, are adaptive shock absorbers. In addition, there is the low durability of the front brake discs, which often vibrate. Another thing is the electric power steering gear. After a greater mileage of 250 to 300,000 kilometers, it is possible that it will require replacement. Thank you for listening to me. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel and rate my video. If you know of any problems with this car that I did not mention, be sure to write about them in the comments.